Thanks, Juanita, and welcome to everyone on the webinar today. As some of you know, these webinars are 90 minutes in total, and that includes questions and some interaction if you care to engage throughout. I'll try to answer your questions as they come up and leave some extra time at the end for more questions and a review of some resources. You're encouraged to use the chat function throughout if you feel like reacting to the material. We'll also make time to pause and comment on the chats if we can. And for those of you who are new to the OCASI webinar series, and as a reminder to those who aren't, note that you will not be identified with your comments, so you can chat freely and anonymously. If we can't answer a question you pose to us, because some of you have given us some tough questions, I might say, within the time frame of this webinar, we'll include it in our follow-up Community of Practice Q&A, and that will be on September 13th from 10:30 to 11:30. I'll remind you about that towards the end of the webinar. The material today is designed to be introductory. It may not seem new to some of you, and having looked at the list of folks on the webinar, some of whom I know that you know a lot of this information, but perhaps you'll pick up a few extra pointers. And for those who find it too introductory, we will try to refer to resources that will give you references to higher level topic information. You can also ask questions where we might be able to get more in depth. In the next 2 webinars in the series, we will go into more depth, so please feel free to join us for those as well. But we wanted to start this series with a basic introduction to give us a common language and understanding of some basic concepts. I'll note that many of the photos featured in the webinar are from existing and operational social enterprises, and I'll try to comment on those as we go through the webinar. This is one in a series of webinars that OCASI has organized, as Juanita said, and it's been contracted to Doreen Weston of Full Circle Consulting, and I thank her for including me as one of the presenters in several of these webinars as part of the Orgwise initiative. While I introduce myself, I'm going to ask Petra to put up the first poll, and we'll visit the results of that in a moment. Petra, if you wouldn't mind. So the poll is asking, how much do you know about social enterprise coming into this webinar? Do you know nothing, a little bit, some, a lot, or you're not sure? So we'll check back with you later. Please take a moment to fill that in as I introduce myself. As Juanita said, my company is called C-Lang Consulting, and I've worked in management and consulting with co-ops and nonprofits for over 25 years. My practice includes work in research and strategic planning, program design and coaching, evaluation, and social enterprise and co-op development. Social enterprise has been a very important focus of my practice. I've coached and helped develop a number of social enterprises, and have also had the opportunity to consult with many social enterprise funders. In 2006, I helped bring the Enterprising Nonprofits program to Toronto, formed and facilitated the Social Purpose Enterprise Network, Toronto, and provided strategic planning supports for the Peel Social Enterprise Enabling Group and the Toronto Enterprise Fund. I'm a founder of and a consultant for the Rural Social Enterprise Constellation of the Ontario Nonprofit Network. Much of the information presented in the workshop today has been developed over the years in my work with colleague Mary Ferguson of Economus Program Development Consultants, and delivered in workshops with nonprofits around Ontario. This is the first time most of this has been presented in a webinar format. In 2001, I became one of the editors of the 2011, or excuse me, in 2010, I became an editor of the 2011 edition of the Canadian Social Enterprise Guide, and I'll refer to this resource throughout the webinar. It is also noted in the resource list. Let's take a look at some of the results of the poll, just so I can get a sense of your levels of knowledge. So 62% of you say you have a little bit of knowledge, and 38% have some. There are none of you who feel confident enough to say you have a lot of knowledge. So that's great. I think that's a good mix. I think we'll be able to provide enough information for those who have a little bit to move that up to some. And for those who stick with me in the next couple webinars, perhaps you'll have a lot of information and knowledge on social enterprise. So again, welcome to this webinar. Here are some of the key messages we're carrying forward from previous webinars. As I say, some of you have been on these. The previous webinars were focused on organizational sustainability and financial diversification, as well as collaboration. So one of the key messages is that we should always, as an organization in social services, as well as in private sector for that matter, have a strong focus on our organizational mission to make collaborations, financial diversification, in this case, social enterprise, work well. One of the other key messages is that earned revenue or social enterprise can be a source of unrestricted income for your organization. By that we mean you don't have to report to various funders for the revenue that you generate through sales of social enterprise. And we'll talk later about how many social enterprises do have to support their social enterprise activity with grants as well, particularly for training components. We've mentioned in the past that you'll need to invest money to make money, and that's also the case with social enterprise. We also mentioned that with respect to collaboration, perhaps not in the sense of investing money, but certainly time and resources need to be invested to make it work. You'll also need to assess your capacity to pursue and sustain new sources of funds, as well as the return on investment, and manage your expectations accordingly. So when you're looking for new sources of funds, as well as exploring collaborations and social enterprise, these things all require certain capacities you may or may not have. You'll need to be clear what your expectations are, what your goals are around new revenue sources, as well as collaboration, and in this case, social enterprise. So you can tell if your investment is worth it for your organization and your community. And this is particularly important when we're thinking about convincing boards or bringing staff on side with some of these activities. Let's look at today's agenda. We're going to do a little bit of defining of social enterprise, just so we're all on the same page with at least one definition. There is not one totally accepted definition in the field, but we'll work with one for the next 3 webinars. We want to look at reasons for social enterprise, the motivations that give rise to your interest in social enterprise. We do want to look at the social enterprise types and structures and look at that development path. Again, in the next couple of webinars, we'll look at the supports and we'll look at more depth into the social enterprise development path. And at the end of the webinar, before we look at the resources, we'll also think about who's who in the field, because the field is growing, and we want to just take a look at some of the people you may run into in the organizations that may be important in your social enterprise journey. The learning objectives for today are that you'll understand more about what social enterprise is and the types of social enterprise. So that brings some of you who have limited knowledge up to hopefully a little bit more. We'd like you to be a little bit more aware of the reasons why organizations pursue social enterprise. We'd like you to recognize some of the steps in the development path that we'll take a bit further in future webinars, and learn about some of the folks, the players, we might say, in the field of social enterprise. Let's try a second poll before we move on, just to get a sense of whether some of you are actually currently operating social enterprises. Petra, if you wouldn't mind. So the question is, do you currently operate a social enterprise or earn revenue through the sale of products or services? Take a moment to fill that in. And while you are, I'm going to just do a special thanks to Mary Ferguson from Economus Program Development Consultants for her development of and contributions to the content of this webinar. We've offered these workshops face-to-face in a number of communities, and some of you may actually have even attended those workshops. As well, much of the material has been influenced through my work with David LePage at the Enterprising Nonprofits Program in BC and now across Canada. We'll come back to the results of that poll in a moment. Right now, I'd like to just comment on a resource we'll actually pull up on the screen later in the webinar, and that is the Enterprising Nonprofits Guide to Social Enterprise. This guide has been edited by a number of experts in the field of social enterprise, and it contains really fantastic information on how to start a social enterprise, why to start a social enterprise, including some up-to-date information on the new CRA regulations and the changing guidelines for social enterprise and charities. So please do revisit this PowerPoint and take a look at that guide. You can download it for free. And again, we'll come back to that a little later. Okay, let's have a look at those poll results. So 28% of you are actually operating social enterprises, which is fantastic. I encourage those of you who are to comment throughout the webinar if you can, and also in the upcoming webinars, about your experience. And if I've said anything that doesn't jive with your experience, please feel free to challenge me or to bring up new points that you think would be helpful to your peers. 67% don't operate social enterprises at this time, to the best of your knowledge, and 6% said you're not sure. And I do appreciate those of you who've clicked on this, because many of us are not quite sure what social enterprise is, and therefore wouldn't be able to answer the question accurately as yet. So perhaps at the end you might answer this a little differently. While we won't take the poll again, it'd be interesting if you wanted to comment in the chat later as to whether you change your mind and you actually discover that you are doing social enterprise in some fashion after hearing the definition and some of the types of social enterprises. Okay. We're going to start with this defining of social enterprise, but I did promise to comment on some of the pictures that I've brought up on this slide, because so much of social enterprise is about storytelling and who's actually running social enterprises. This slide shows a photo of Revent Interpretation and Translation Services. They were formerly known as Riverdale Interpreters, and it's been in operation since 2001. And for those who are interested, you can go onto the web and visit their website to find out more. As social enterprise, as interest in social enterprise grows, there are many more people becoming involved in the sector, and there's not one common language I found that we can all share to understand social enterprise. So I'm going to look at a couple definitions here, and we'll choose one for the next couple webinars that we can work with. Here's one definition that the Collaborative for Innovative Social Enterprise Development in Ottawa uses. That is, social enterprise is an organization or venture that achieves its social mission by using value-added earned income strategies. Now, this definition applies to both privately incorporated organizations as well as not-for-profits. And in the field of social enterprise, you'll find some differences in people's understanding of social enterprise, where some would include in their programming businesses that have social objectives but are incorporated as private businesses. In the case of this series of webinars, we'll be using the next definition, which is that used by the Enterprising Nonprofits Initiative, and that is a business operated by a not-for-profit that's directly involved in the production and or selling of goods and services to customers for the dual purpose of generating income from sales and achieving social, cultural, or environmental aims. So again, the two definitions do share that concept of production, sales of goods and services, and the production of goods and services, but the difference here is that it's a business operated by a not-for-profit. There are many, many social organizations that operate or do, I might say do social enterprise. Some refer to social enterprise as a process as opposed to a product. I've included newcomer organizations here, but there are also housing providers, employment training organizations, arts and culture, all the way to agricultural societies, faith groups, and student councils. In all of the work that I've done in social enterprise, I find that each time we go around to a community, we find more organizations that are actually using earned income strategies that we didn't include on our list. So this list, each time I do a workshop, grows, and I'm sure that you'll come up with other kinds of not-for-profits that in fact are operating not-for-profit social enterprises. Some people may be surprised to know that agricultural societies that operate fairs at this time of year are some of the oldest nonprofit social enterprises, as are cooperatives. Nonprofit housing and daycare and recreation groups like the YMCA and the YWCA are all operating social enterprises, given that a very large amount of their funding, their operational budget, are generated through fee-for-service. Social enterprise is often described as having multiple bottom lines. Not only are they focused on sales and income generation, or a financial bottom line, but also on service and people development, community development. And some enterprises also integrate that environmental bottom line into their social enterprise goals. A concept that's becoming very popular today is that of a blended value proposition. This was proposed by Jed Emerson, who is the founding director of the Roberts Enterprise Development Fund in the U.S. And what he says is that according to the blended value proposition, all organizations, whether not-for-profit or for-profit, create value that consists of economic, social, and environmental value components. Of course, they do that to different degrees and with differing priorities, and we'll talk about that in a moment. Jed Emerson posed this because he was interested in how we can encourage investors to see that as a blended value proposition and invest more readily in social and environmental enterprises, as well as those that have a higher priority for a financial bottom line. I'm going to show a quick video that, oh, excuse me, perhaps I won't. I'm not sure how to get out of this here. We'll do that a little later. But I do want to take a look at the business model continuum now. And this, excuse me, slide does show the continuum on which traditional nonprofits that we know well exist within the scheme of traditional for-profit corporations. We know that traditional nonprofits primarily work to create social value, whilst private sector businesses are mainly in business to generate economic value. Those of us in the nonprofit sector know that nonprofits do not only generate social value, because we also employ people in communities throughout Ontario. We also purchase supplies that are coming from the private sector. So it's not a purely social value that we end up with in the nonprofit sector. But in terms of our understanding of social enterprise, you can see where social enterprise moves towards the middle, where some socially responsible businesses are also moving in terms of creating more sustainable economies. One thing that I've learned in my work with social enterprise is that the worlds of nonprofits and private enterprises are still quite different, even though we're seeing a lot more corporate social responsibility and environmental businesses that are moving towards social enterprises operated by nonprofits. We still operate with different cultures. If we take a look at this slide, we can see some of the issues that can arise when nonprofits operate businesses, as well as when business people try to understand and support social enterprise and nonprofits. The primary goal of a nonprofit is to fulfill its social mission. That's part of our letter's patent, and we incorporate under an act that suggests that we're there to be representative of and to give service to community, while private enterprise is set up primarily to make a profit for investor owners. Within nonprofits, we have many stakeholders and levels of accountability. We have funders, boards of directors, community, clients, our staff. And so decision-making can be a lot slower than in private business. Our systems are often not set up for quick business decisions and corrections to business models, as are some private corporations. Also, nonprofits are expected to apply the bulk of their resources to service their missions. We all know that we have little administrative overhead these days and resources to invest in new ventures. However, in business, it's very common to invest capital and infrastructure and to spend a significant amount of resources on R&D in order to compete effectively in the marketplace. So we're different in that way. What we do share across sectors is the absolute need to be attentive to the needs of our clients or customers and to our investors, and so in the nonprofit world, that is, primarily to our funders, in order to be sustainable. Needless to say, there are many entrepreneurial nonprofits that have organizational cultures and assets that may be applied to pursue social enterprise and innovation in initiatives. Others may be a little more challenged in this regard, so I'm going to ask Petra to pull up the next poll to see how entrepreneurial you think your organization may be. We'll give you a moment to fill that in. I'll stop at this point and say, when we were doing our webinar on financial sustainability, even if you're not pursuing social enterprise, being entrepreneurial is a very significant asset for organizations that are going to diversify revenue sources. So it's important to think about what is it in your organization that may be holding you back from being entrepreneurial and opportunity seeking. Let's have a look at the results here. 20% of you, oh, it's changing a little bit, but I think I'm going to give you the results right now. 50% of you are right down the middle half, say you're somewhat entrepreneurial. Say not at all. And 25% say very. It'd be very interesting to know, and if any of you want to comment in the chat area, if the 25% that are very entrepreneurial are the ones operating social enterprises, or in this case have diversified revenue sources. If you feel like commenting on that, please do. For those of you who are not feeling very entrepreneurial, there are things that you can do, and some of our discussion through the social enterprise webinars will bring up some of these things that will help you get ready to do social enterprise and equally just to be more entrepreneurial and opportunity seeking. And for those 50% down the middle, that's just great. That's a great base to work from to begin to think about or operate your social enterprise. Given that we're talking a little bit about entrepreneurship, I wanted to talk a little bit about a concept that's becoming more popular, and that is social entrepreneurship. But before I do, I just want to refer to what I think is a very entrepreneurial organization, and this slide, this picture, which is of a Bixie bike. And what you're seeing is the shop at the Learning Enrichment Foundation, where they do offer bike mechanic training as well as servicing the contract for maintaining the Bixie bikes in Toronto. This is a significant opportunity that Learning Enrichment Foundation was ready for and sought out when the Bixie bikes were brought in. So let's look at a definition. Here, first of all, let's think about what an entrepreneur is before I read the definition for a social entrepreneur. An entrepreneur is one who organizes, manages, and assumes the risks of a business or enterprise. This is from Wikipedia. Here's a definition for a social entrepreneur. That's any person in any sector who uses earned income strategies to pursue a social objective. So a social entrepreneur does not only have to be in a not-for-profit sector, but can also be in the private sector, using private sector businesses to address significant social issues. As Wikipedia also says, social entrepreneurship is the recognition of a social problem and the uses of entrepreneurial principles to organize, create, and manage a social venture to achieve a desired social change. The key concepts in social entrepreneurship are really focus on the individual, in this case the person who has the idea and entrepreneurially organizes to create a vehicle to address a social change objective using the entrepreneurial characteristics. The risk-taking that's required, as I said, the utilization of entrepreneurial qualities and means, and addressing social issues or achieving social change. This appears to be a growing international movement. I don't think it's one that's well understood right now. Perhaps it will be as we go along. Many of you have heard about Mohammed Yunus, and the founder of and manager of the Grameen Bank, and he's often referred to as a prime social entrepreneur. The Ashoka Foundation has also promoted social entrepreneurship by supporting leaders like Mohammed around the world. Following on the success of the School for Social Entrepreneurs in the UK, where people of all stripes take their ideas for social businesses to the school to incubate them, we now have a School for Social Entrepreneurs in Toronto. That's very new. The importance of this concept for this webinar in particular is that it takes social entrepreneurs within nonprofits to champion and develop successful social enterprises. Also, I think resources like the School for Social Entrepreneurs may be of interest to entrepreneurial newcomers and immigrants in Toronto with ideas for social programs, businesses, organizations that address a social need. Here's another resource that could be of interest to you. This is Sea Change magazine. Again, it's a very new resource. It's a free subscription and it is Canadian. So again, if you wanted to poke around and find out how the concept of social entrepreneurship is being understood in Canada, you can check out this resource. Now I think before we go into the next set of slides, we'll take a look at the next poll if we could, Petra. We're going to ask you how you would rate your organization's interest in social enterprise at this time. I'm not assuming that all of you on the webinar are very, very interested. You might just want to get a quick check on what social enterprise is and the basics, but some of you may be very interested. So let's take a look and see what you say on this. And as we're waiting for the poll to be completed, I'll talk a little bit about the evolution of social enterprise. I want to comment that social enterprise is not new. For those of us who've been in the nonprofit sector, when the concept of social enterprise was introduced, many of us had not heard those terms but understood what people were talking about when they talked about earned revenue strategies, for instance. Those of us who've been in the co-op sector know that that certainly is not a new sector. The co-op sector is one of the oldest social enterprise sectors in Canada. And co-ops in Canada followed the movement in Britain that was begun by a group that was called the Rochdale Pioneers. I'll just have a look here. In this slide, you'll see a picture of the original co-op store at Toad Lane in Rochdale, the UK. Just give a little bit of history because many of us don't hear often about co-ops when we're hearing about social enterprise. The Rochdale Society of Equitable Pioneers was founded in 1844, so it's not a new movement. It was an early consumer cooperative and became a prototype for other societies in Great Britain and also around the world. These folks were most famous for designing some principles called the Rochdale Principles, which have provided the foundation for principles on which co-ops around the world operate this day and are actually incorporated into the cooperative legislation in Ontario, Canada, and many, many other countries. This was a group of 10 weavers and 20 others in Rochdale, England. During the Industrial Revolution, when many workers were being forced into poverty, these tradespersons decided to band together and open their own store selling food items they couldn't otherwise afford. So I would say that they are or were social entrepreneurs. And the co-ops have now been in existence in Canada since the 1800s, and many are being formed today. And I did notice even in those participating in the webinar today that some of you are intimately involved in cooperatives, either living and working in co-ops or have formed co-op social enterprises. Not only co-ops, but other forms of nonprofit social enterprise have been used for some time. Those of you who think about the YW and the YMCAs know that fee-for-service models for funding have been going for many, many years, and sports and recreation clubs and other nonprofits have used this way of generating revenue for some time. The first self-employment training programs were introduced in Canada in 1988, and some of these evolved into training businesses that have become what we know as some of the oldest social enterprises in Ontario. In Quebec, there's a very active social economy and many, many social enterprises funded by both municipal, regional, and provincial governments. Some of you might remember back in 1993 when we did have a number of community economic development and self-employment programs started through the Jobs Ontario program. And again, through that period, a number of social enterprises were started. In 2000, the United Way of Greater Toronto launched the Toronto Enterprise Fund, and today the Toronto Enterprise Fund also manages the Enterprising Nonprofits program in Toronto, and the Enterprising Nonprofits program is also replicated in Ottawa through CSED, a group that I mentioned earlier. So today there are hundreds of examples of nonprofits taking the lead and developing social businesses. Interest is also growing, and here are some of the reasons that nonprofits have told me why. We know that there's a very unpredictable and shifting funding context and a need for nonprofits, where possible, to generate unrestricted revenue. Those of you who I've worked with have said that funders are increasingly adopting very targeted funding approaches for only very specific programs based on government mandates. Project-based funding is replacing core funding and has given funders significant control over organizational priorities. Funders are reluctant to fund our administrative costs, and funding is often provided not only by government but other funders for short periods of time, so it can be very unpredictable. Reporting requirements have increased. Those of you who are integrating new databases and reporting requirements for some funders know that this is a significant requirement. And we're finding now that funders are increasingly demanding demonstrations of secured funding from other sources or even program results prior to paying for programming. We also know there's been a gradual increase in business-based thinking in the social development sector. I like to say that I think the private sector has a lot to learn from the nonprofit sector as well, but we are learning some lessons from the private sector about how to become more efficient in this time of restraint. Sometimes social enterprise can present an opportunity to creatively address mission. We're seeing some real innovations in partnerships in social enterprises, and we will mention a few of these as we go along today. We've also seen an increasing interest of some private sector folks in social returns and social impacts, and some of those private sector entrepreneurs are migrating to social enterprise and working with nonprofits. One example that I can tell you about is a chef, an executive chef who we've spoken to, who's now opened 3 nonprofit bistros that train people in the food services and hospitality sectors. This person was working in the private sector for many years before he started to work on and replicate his ideas around nonprofit social enterprise in the food service sector. And finally, there's now a growing dissatisfaction with some of the old ways of doing things, and that goes for both our sector and the private sector. So it's causing shifts in the culture of both, and it's bringing the two sectors together somewhat. Let's take a look at the poll results to see about your interest in social enterprise. So we have about 15% who have a fairly low interest in social enterprise. So for you, today we'll just be exploring whether this could be of greater interest to you, and I appreciate that. About 30% have a moderate interest, and what I assume there is that some of you are not sure whether you're interested in taking it further. You want to hear what we have to say, but you may or may not take it and do anything with the information today. And almost 60% have a high interest. So those are the groups that are motivated to use some of the concepts. Again, I'll encourage you to attend the other webinars, come to the community of practices so we can work together and really capitalize on that interest at this point in time. I'll also, again, as I say, talk about a number of resources for those who are most interested and motivated to get you going and learn as much as you can on your own timing. So what are some of the reasons for social enterprise development? Before I look at that, I just want to comment on this slide. This is some pictures and graphics from Windfall Brides. They're a bridal boutique and wholesale outlet run by a nonprofit charity called Windfall that provides clothing to persons on social assistance. The boutique offers brides high-end dresses at wholesale prices as well as job training. The way that this group does their social enterprise is that bridal salons across the GTA that have excess gowns that they're not able to move, donate these new surplus dresses to the boutique, and then Windfall sells them to raise money for their anti-poverty programs. It's a very intriguing method of doing social enterprise. Okay, so why start a social enterprise? There's several reasons for becoming involved, and here are the three basic ones. To fill a community or market need, and that could be a need for employment in a market, a need for a particular business, a goods that serves certain goods and services to the community. To advance your organizational mission, of course, and to enhance your financial sustainability. Now, most social enterprises pursue a mix of those objectives, although 2 out of 3 are pretty good if you can focus on them. Those that try to do all 3 often have to have extremely good business ideas to fulfill those goals. I'm going to read very briefly from the Guide to Social Enterprise some of the ways that others have come into thinking about social enterprise and deciding whether to pursue it. Here's one. We've purchased or been given an asset that would allow us to generate revenue. It's a great opportunity. What do we do with it? Here's another, and this is very relevant to those of you who've been on the funding diversification webinars. We want to diversify our funding. We think that running a business can provide us with unrestricted sources of revenue. This could help us with some core administrative expenses. Here's a third. We currently operate programs and services for low-income clients in a community. We want to see if we can sell these services or programs to new markets. In other words, those who can afford it. We'd like to operate our fee-for-service programming in a more business-like manner. That's a good reason to think about social enterprise. This one, which we'll pursue a lot more in the next 3 webinars, we want to provide employment opportunities for the clients we serve. How can we go about this in social enterprise? We operate, here's another, we operate in a geographical area that's economically depressed. The low-income people in the community need jobs, and we can attract conventional businesses. We can't attract conventional businesses to our neighborhood. And we might assume this is just rural, but there are many urban, inner city, and urban, suburban neighborhoods where having a community business operated as a social enterprise can be a great solution to the need for jobs and for services in that area. And here's another final one. We've heard about a successful social enterprise in another part of Canada. We think, given our mandate, potential partnerships and volunteers, we can make it work in our community. So all of those sort of reasons or questions are really great beginnings for social enterprise, and those may have resonated with some of you in the call. The most important message here, though, is the balance of motivations, or the motivations have to balance mission with the outcomes that you're trying to achieve in financial or job training, and that truly is the art of social enterprise. And some of those reasons for social enterprise, we commented on these. Turning assets into business. Products and services that directly fulfill your mission. You can extend certain programming to make it revenue generating or capitalize on partnerships. You could take an existing product that serves a current audience and move it towards serving a new audience, perhaps geographically, or a customer segment that can afford to pay fee for service. You might also leverage new products and services utilizing excess staff resources, client resources, real estate or hard assets, or even intellectual property and soft assets. So there are many ways that you can look at the resources and assets that you currently have and potentially turn them into social enterprise. I want to comment on at least one partnership and a couple examples of these because I think it does help illustrate. In the case of programs that might be turned into social enterprise, we've looked at feasibility work, for instance, with graffiti removal services that were programs for youth, at-risk youth, that could have been turned in, or they were exploring whether that could be turned into a fee-for-service social enterprise. Similarly, many groups offer things like sewing training, community kitchens, and they've utilized that programming as a way of either generating a social business or encouraging sole proprietorship, entrepreneurial development for clients. One example, excuse me, of a partnership that gave rise to a social enterprise is the Silver Brush. This is a painting company that was set up resulting from a partnership with HouseLink Community Homes and Park, which is a recreation and advocacy center for persons with mental health issues. The Silver Brush goal is to provide long-term full-time and part-time employment that builds trade skills and provides on-the-job training for Park and HouseLink members. So it was a great partnership that turned an employment programming initiative into a social enterprise. I have also spoken with a number of organizations that are looking at their physical space and seeing how they might include a leasing arrangement with other organizations to generate some additional revenue, and in those cases sometimes offering back office services, even creating things like local centers for social innovation, local nonprofit centers, where one organization or a few take the initiative and turn that into a social enterprise. Okay, time for another poll. At this time, we're just bringing it up. At this time, our organization is most interested in social enterprise activity that will provide unrestricted revenue for our programs, will provide new training and employment opportunities, or will provide both new revenue and program opportunities. Neither, not sure, still thinking about it. And those of you who are not particularly interested in social enterprise, who had a lower interest, maybe would answer not sure. So we'll give you a moment to answer that. And while you do, I'll just talk about the reality check that we need when thinking about social enterprise. Whenever I do a workshop on social enterprise, one of the first things I say is, I'm not encouraging all of you to do social enterprise. It's not a panacea. For many of you, it's not the best way to either fulfill a programming objective or to generate revenue. It's worth thinking about, surely, but it isn't a panacea. It's not magic because it won't save an organization whose financial sustainability is seriously in question. It takes a strong and well-organized and entrepreneurial organization to develop and operate a successful social enterprise. And as I've already said, it does require significant capacity investment of time and money. So let's be real. It's not a silver bullet. And perhaps we can take a quick look at the results of the poll to see what some of you had said would be your motivation for social enterprise. Okay. So 81% said you'd like to provide new revenue and program opportunities for your clients, and that's understandable. What we'd like to do is integrate both a way of generating unrestricted revenue and doing program. For some, and again, I will keep referring to the future webinars because we can't go into too much depth in this one, but we'll talk about what it means to break even as a social enterprise when you have both revenue generating goals and program development goals. 13% of you want to provide new training and employment opportunities for clients, and that is a very clear objective. Those social enterprises, there are many, many options. We'll look at them in just one moment. And others, about 6%, want to generate unrestricted revenue. And for those, we'll talk about the type of social enterprises you would need to consider in order to do so. So we have quite a mix, but I would say the majority want to integrate both the revenue generating with the opportunities for your clients, which is great and complex, so we'll talk a little bit about that as we go on. So let's look at the types of social enterprise. Before I do, I just want to comment on the pictures on this slide. Here we're featuring Haween Enterprises in Toronto and Ethnicity Catering in Calgary. Both are social enterprises that have evolved from training and settlement programming for newcomers. So they are groups that have had both that desire to generate revenue and to provide training opportunities for clients. Haween is a contract sewing company, and Ethnicity is a multicultural caterer. For more information on Haween, you can visit their website. And for Ethnicity, I've included a PowerPoint slideshow on their enterprise in the resource list, which is worth taking a look at because they comment on some of the risks and opportunities they faced as a social enterprise. And I will be commenting on some of their points in this webinar. Okay, so here are some categories for social enterprises for you to recognize. Again, for the purpose of getting a shared language as we go forward, we have human or employment development enterprises, mission-based enterprises, revenue-generating enterprises, and cooperatives. Let's look at these one at a time. Human and employment development enterprises are also called, or can also be called, social purpose enterprises. These can be started in a number of ways. They can be a community response to issues of unemployment, to poverty, the need for accommodated employment for a particular group of people who may need that extra support that the private sector will not provide. They can also be started as a way to do procurement replacement. That's a term I use, and I'll talk about that in a minute. That is replacing the purchase of supply from a private sector business by providing that business yourself as a non-for-profit or in partnership with another. Or they could simply be a new idea for generating revenue while serving clients. Community response to need. Here's some examples. Some social enterprises are started outside of an existing, and this is social purpose enterprise or human development enterprises, can be started outside of an existing not-for-profit by citizens who want to provide employment or training for specific groups. These are often those who are particularly barriered. Perhaps they don't have the Canadian experience, as in folks who are newcomers, people who may have disabilities that are significant enough that they may need accommodated workplaces. For example, Common Ground Co-op, that's featured here with their catering enterprise, Lemon and Allspice Catering, was set up by supporters and parents of persons with intellectual disabilities. They now run 5 businesses, a catering company, 3 coffee kiosks, and a toy cleaning company. Away Express Courier in Toronto is one of our older social enterprises in Toronto. It was set up by persons with experience in the mental health system and continues to employ over 50 persons in the Toronto area. Another group, and it's not featured in the, Options, I should comment on Options in Mississauga, is a printer and courier, and they were set up again by a group of concerned citizens who wanted to provide training opportunities for persons with intellectual disabilities. Another example, although I don't have a picture, is the CED for Immigrant Women in Pickering, Durham. They've responded to the needs of newcomers for work by supporting the formation of both tutoring and childcare cooperatives. Here's a few examples of those who are using this kind of procurement replacement strategy for social enterprise. It's a growing trend. for some nonprofits to replace outsourced services with social enterprises that hire their own clients or those of a partner. I've mentioned the Silver Brush earlier in this webinar. Here's another example. Salvation Army has set up a laundry service, and the Salvation Army shelters in Toronto have a total of about 615 beds, and it costs the shelters $325,000 a year just to clean the sheets, towels, and pillowcases. So they began to wonder about the possibility of doing their own living. They could hire men and women who live in their shelters and walk alongside them in the hopes of helping them gain confidence and become marketable for jobs in the mainstream again. This model, I've just found out, is being replicated in Peel in a partnership between Peel Region, the Salvation Army, and a nonprofit called Street Soccer, and it's called the Street Soccer Laundry, which is kind of neat. Another group that's featured in this slide is the Learning Enrichment Foundation, and it provides meals for its own child care centers as well as food services training and child care assistance training, and that their food services feed their child care children, and their food services training feeds the food services that does feed the children. So you get the drift. It's a very integrated strategy for social enterprise and procurement replacement. And many social enterprises provide innovative ways to support clients. Here are some pictures of a social enterprise in Peel Region run by St. Leonard Society. They operate a catering company, a lawn maintenance company, a cleaning company, and I don't doubt they'll stop there. I'm sure they'll come up with other companies, all to provide meaningful employment for men who have previously been incarcerated and are living in their nonprofit housing. They're utilizing their social enterprise as a way of integrating their clients into the community and increasing community involvement in their work. Supportive Housing in Peel has also helped to create Destination Cafe, which is featured here. Destination Cafe is a coffee shop and internet cafe managed and staffed by persons living with mental illness. In addition to organic, fair trade, and freshly roasted coffee, the cafe offers its customers specialty coffees and coffee beans wholesale, and they provide a wide variety of gift baskets. So they're operating as a way to both train and provide short-term and long-term employment for the clients of Supportive Housing in Peel. So let's also look at some of the kinds of social enterprises that are operating out there. This slide features a picture of the a social enterprise started by the Children's Aid Society Foundation and a particular social enterprise or entrepreneur, and it does parties and provides recordings for those parties, and I've lost the word right now, but they're a fantastic social enterprise providing music for all kinds of events. So here's some typical human development enterprises. These include hospitality, food services, landscaping, moving, bike repair, print shops, staffing solutions, and retail stores and couriers. You'll note that many of the human development enterprises are created using low barrier to entry employment so that there are opportunities for those who are coming through the social services to gain confidence in the workplace and life skills and work skills. Here are some examples of mission-based social enterprises. Social and recreational services, third-party contracts for services, and that may include counseling and training, and again, as we mentioned, fee-for-service type of social enterprises. There are also common revenue-generating social enterprises that include facility rental, as I mentioned, leasing of extra space, possibly parking lots. You'll see many churches and hospitals that operate parking lots that generate significant revenue. for the organization but are not necessarily attached to their mission or to hiring anyone who may be hard to employ. Thrift shops are very common as a revenue generating strategy, training of trainers, and selling of donated articles. And finally, some examples of co-op social enterprises are childcare and nurseries, local food buying and distribution groups, and this is an area where many folks are getting involved in the local food movement and are creating nonprofits and cooperatives that are social enterprises. Social service support organizations that provide support to executive directors and back office kind of services. These are being done through some co-ops, and of course youth and student cooperatives. I think it's time for another poll. Petra, thanks. If you could pull that up. I'm going to ask you this time, how would you rate your organization's capacity to engage in social enterprise? Is it really bad, very poor, poor, fair, good, or very good? And actually, I guess I didn't give you one option, which is you don't care or you're not very interested at this time, because we only had 5 offerings and I wanted to use a fairly good Likert scale. But anyway, do what you can with that. And while you do, I'm going to talk a little bit about newcomer social enterprises, very specifically because this is an OCASI webinar. In the Orgwise video, Lucia Harrison, the Executive Director of the Kitchener-Waterloo Multicultural Center, shares her agency's experience related to developing and nurturing a social enterprise as part of her agency's plan to diversify funding. They set up an interpretation service, and it began 15 years ago with an operating budget of $20,000, and that's pretty small for a program, and it's now grown to an operating budget of over $500,000 or $500,000. So I think it's worth thinking about how these things happen. I'm going to pull that slide up. LEF, as I said, the Learning Enrichment Foundation, offers childcare and has done so since the 1980s. They now have 18 childcare centers and 15 before and after school programs that they provide food for as well in the City of York and Etobicoke. It's one of the largest childcare services operating in the City of Toronto. So childcare services operated as a not-for-profit is a social enterprise. In addition, Learning Enrichment Foundation provides the food services for these, which is another revenue-generating operation. But that's not all. They do youth employment training and bike mechanics, as I've said, and repair. They maintain the Bixie Bikes fleet in contract with the owners of that service. They have early childhood assistant training and food service and entrepreneurial training, all feeding their social enterprise activities. The Multicultural Health Brokers Co-op in Calgary is a very interesting social enterprise. It's a group of multi-ethnic, multiracial women with a concern for those families who were not accessing health services in their city. They're a worker cooperative that provides research, interpretation, and brokering of services as well as other programming to improve health outcomes for immigrant families. Many of you know about St. Stephen's Mediation Services in Toronto. St. Stephen's is a settlement house in downtown Toronto. This is an example of a program that's been leveraged into a social enterprise. You can learn more about their services by reviewing the PowerPoint from the OCASI Executive Directors Forum in 2011, where Bill Sinclair from St. Stephen's presented on social enterprise alongside of Peter Frampton from the Learning Enrichment Foundation, Margaret Hancock from Family Services Toronto, and Lucia Harrison from Kitchener-Waterloo Multicultural Center. So you'll get a great overview of some social enterprises if you haven't already attended that conference, and that is on the web right now. Let's look at the results from poll 5. How would you rate your organization's capacity to engage in social enterprise? So none of you said poor or very poor, which is a good sign. Perhaps you're being generous, perhaps you're being realistic, so that's just great. 43% of you said fair, 36% said good, and 21% said very good. So again, there's about a quarter of you on the webinar today, just about a quarter to a fourth, that are feeling quite confident in both your knowledge and your capacity for social enterprise and your entrepreneurial capacity. Another 36%, about 35, 36% or a third, that have fairly good capacity. Again, we hope that this presentation and the next two will help move that a little bit forward. And for those that have fair, again, we maybe didn't give you a sense of whether you were interested or not, a chance to answer whether you were interested, but that 43% fair is actually really very, very good. If you have some building blocks in place, others can be put into place if you are interested in pursuing it further. But as we have to do in any social enterprise or any new endeavor, we have to think about the risks and challenges. And this is where, you know, if you have a fair capacity, you're really going to want to think very seriously about the risks and challenges of social enterprise before taking any additional steps. What we've heard from folks in the field, and some of these are particularly from presentations of those who are running newcomer serving organizations, one of the biggest risks is the mission drift. I was in a webinar yesterday where the organization received $200,000 to pursue the R&D around social enterprise so that they didn't have to drift from their mission. And that's quite an interesting issue because most of us do not have access to that kind of funds. Low-income jobs for newcomers, this is one we'll discuss further as we go along. We don't want to create ghettos for newcomers. We want to create opportunities. So sometimes there has been critique expressed that social enterprise is not providing the best job opportunities, and there are differing points of view on that, especially if they're transitional jobs to mainstream jobs. Competition and community, we'll go into that the next time, but we do have to look at the private sector and other nonprofits you may be competing with and the risks associated with that, and the fact that you may invest significant time without significant returns. Greatest challenges are time, cost of startup, the fact that some of your boards may be quite risk averse, and we will talk about that in the third webinar, and the idea of integrating social enterprise culture into your organization. But there are benefits and opportunities to social enterprise. We know that we said again and again, if you do it right, you can have access to unrestricted revenue. Staff are developed through social enterprise, and through this often become more innovative, more entrepreneurial. There can be greater recognition in the broader community. You serve clients in new ways, and you're part of building a social economy, an economy that is addressing more than just the financial bottom line. Time for another poll, and I'm going to have to run through some of the material here because we are getting late in the webinar. Let's see what that poll asks us. As a result of this webinar, I'm interested in learning more about social enterprise. So let's see if any of this has twigged your interest. Feel free to answer that as I go on. I wanted to talk a little bit about a CED resource, or Community Economic Development resource, that you might want to take a look at. I'm not going to go in depth as I might have because of the time, but it is the Canadian CED Network hosted research project on immigrant and social enterprise, as well as the newcomer CED network called ICANN, the Immigrant and Refugees Community Action Network. I'll have a look. We'll take that poll down now. We'll take a look at the results in a minute. But this is a resource you might want to take a look at. There are case studies and also catalogs of social enterprises that are operating for and with newcomers. What we find is that there still is a need to do some mapping of immigrant-led and newcomer-serving organizations, so social enterprises. We're trying to learn a little bit more about the definitions or conditions for success and the supports that are available for newcomers and newcomer-serving organizations. But one thing that's very, very clear is that most of the groups that I've worked with newcomers, in particular newcomer-led social enterprises, is that they need direct support from their settlement organizations and business development organizations to help with the business planning, management skills, and marketing. And they also have to tap the support from other community organizations and individuals for funding, volunteer labor, and mentoring. And this is particularly true when newcomers are still in the middle of a settlement process and they need extra supports as well as significant income to survive and thrive in the world. I'm going to talk a little bit about social enterprise structures. I'll comment on this slide. This is the Community Environment Alliance's Enterprise.mp4. It's called Share IT. They recycle computer hardware and offer it refurbished to people living in poverty, but they also, through the Ontario Electronic Stewardship Program, generate revenue for their programming by returning unusable equipment and components that are further recycled. So in terms of structures, and again we'll go into this in the next webinars, there are three primary structures, or three and a bit. The majority of social enterprises in Ontario operate as cost centers within an organization, a nonprofit. Some are set up within an existing nonprofit as a separately incorporated social enterprise. And we earlier talked about Options, Print Shop, and A-Way Courier as examples. There are also social enterprises created as for-profit subsidiaries, wholly or partially controlled, or separate nonprofits. One example of that is NT Temps in Nottawasaga around Alliston. It's a temp agency. It was set up as a subsidiary to Nottawasaga Futures. And this operation, or this type of option, requires more legal considerations and is, of course, of higher risk, so you'll need to give that some quite a bit of thought and planning if you're thinking of setting up a separate, either a joint venture or a for-profit subsidiary. And finally, a social enterprise can be operated as a cooperative. Again, we'll go into more detail on this next time. Here are some factors related to the structure. What's the primary purpose of your business, and how do you stand in relation to CRA policy? That's the Canadian Revenue Agency if you're a charity. What's that blend of your objectives between generating revenue and social purpose, and what's the scale of the business? If it's very small, obviously you're going to operate and derive from a program, you'll operate as a cost center within your existing nonprofit. How much risk are you and your board willing to take, and what amount of control do you need? Sometimes when your enterprise is started by a champion who is a social entrepreneur, there may be a need to set up a separate corporation to give them a little bit more control over the enterprise. Your need for accessing equity capital or different forms of funding and financing, and the different sources that are available are certainly factors in deciding on structure. And the effect on your community image and reputation. Again, all of these we'll talk about further in next webinars. Is it legal for a charity to operate a social enterprise? And the short answer is yes. We'll go into this in I believe it's in the third webinar, because there are evolving regulations related to social enterprise and revenue generation. We'll look at a featured resource for those of you who want to find out more about this right away. This is the CRA statement on community economic development and social enterprise, so please revisit the PowerPoint and go and take a look at that. Also, a lot of commentary on social enterprise and CRA regulation and policy is coming out of the BC Centre for Social Enterprise. We're going to go quickly through the stages of development. This picture on this slide is from the Learning Enrichment Foundation we've already talked about. Okay, so in this webinar, we're talking, and the next couple, we'll be talking a lot about defining your goals. What do you consider your objectives for social enterprise? We've asked you some of that in the poll. And we're going to ask you next time, how ready are you for social enterprise? And we've asked you a bit about your capacity right now. Who needs to be involved and who needs to get ready? The next step in a social enterprise is looking at developing your venture criteria. If you don't already have a very clear business idea or opportunity, you have to think about your resources and assets, the opportunities in the community and the market, and again, how do those match with your objectives and your mission. Then you go into pre-feasibility. Again, we'll be looking at feasibility questions next time. How feasible is it from a business standpoint, but also how feasible is it from a social and organizational standpoint? Finally, you'll do some in-depth analysis in the market and in your own organization to find out what needs to be adjusted in order to make this a feasible option. And at this point, you're still questioning whether this is a go or no-go decision for you. Finally, you go into business planning. At this point, you've generally decided it's a very good idea and you're going to pursue it, and then you go into execution. The numbers at the bottom, the timelines, are very arbitrary. For some, opportunities arise and are pursued very quickly. For many, it can take years before a social enterprise comes to be. The main thing is to, at this point, assess the assets and your capabilities to find out whether you're a good prospect for a social enterprise. First of all, is your organization culture ready? Are you ready for change? Because it'll rock your world, social enterprise, if you do it right. It's very different from operating general social service programming. What are your current assets and resources? We've talked about that, and how can you apply them and leverage them for a business venture? And what are your capabilities? What do you possess in your staffing and your back office and infrastructure that could transfer to managing the business? In the next webinar, we'll be looking at your organizational readiness, understanding idea generation, and questions and steps in feasibility. So let's have a look. I think we have one poll that we're still going to revisit, and then we'll look at, oh, yeah, we're just going to look at the results of that webinar. As a result of this webinar, I'm interested in learning more about social enterprise. So 13% who weren't sure they were really that interested anyway. It's a maybe. So maybe we caught a little bit of interest. Who knows? 87% absolutely, and none of you are still thinking about it, which is a good sign. So we have a number of motivated and those that are maybe interested in coming back. So we do hope you'll join us for the next webinar. Given the time, I'm just going to pull these slides up but not go into them in any great depth. These are some of the intermediaries in social enterprise that you'll get to know if you start down the path. We've talked about the Toronto Enterprise Fund and CSED in Ottawa. There is an enabling group in Peel, the Ontario Nonprofit Network I'm working quite actively with on social enterprise in rural communities. You'll hear something about Social Innovation Generation and MARS. They do not any longer, as I understand it, have an advisory service for nonprofit social enterprise, but they have an active role in looking at social finance. The Social Purpose Enterprise Network of Toronto, some of you may be members, and if you are not and operating a social enterprise, I encourage you to Google that and get in touch. The Center for Social Innovation has a number of roles vis-a-vis social enterprise, the New School for Social Entrepreneurs in Toronto, and Pillar Nonprofit in London has an enabling program. At the national level, you'll see a number of groups here, and I encourage you to take a look at this a little bit later, and so we can have a little bit of time at the end of the webinar to visit a resource. I won't go over it in depth. Okay, so the key messages here. Interest in social enterprise is growing, okay, and we know from this webinar a number of you are very interested in social enterprise. Social enterprises come in many different sizes and shapes, and you'll need to look at your goals and objectives in order to decide what shape and size it should be, or whether you really need to be involved in social enterprise. And the return on investment in social enterprise takes time and planning. It's not a silver bullet for financial concerns. On the other hand, it can be a source of revenue for programming and a new innovative way to address your programming. So here's some resources. Again, I'm not going to go into detail. I've mentioned many of these already, but I am going to bring one of them up with a little help. I'm going to bring the Social Enterprise Guide up. Just scroll through these here. So know that you can visit this. So let's have a look. I've actually got the homework slide up, and I'll talk to you about that as I go to get this resource. We want you to visit the Orgwise resources that are already online, because a number of them are very, very helpful, and Lucia's video is I found very, very excellent in explaining her journey in social enterprise. We're going to look right now at the Canadian Social Enterprise Guide before we end. And I'd really like you to think, if you're coming back to the next couple webinars, to think about your goals a little bit further, and even jot down your objectives, because we will revisit them next time and the time after. Okay, so we're going to go and take a look at the guide to social enterprise. You'll see it on your screen here, and that's sort of the cover page. It's big, so it's taking up a lot of the page, but we are going to go to one page in particular, and that is the agency self-assessment. Okay, so for those of you who are going to follow the path with me next time, I'd really like you to take a look at this. You can download this for free from the internet, and this particular resource will help you walk through basic readiness. Those of you who have a low readiness will know, and you'll also know from the questions what areas you may need to work on. Those of you who have a high level of readiness will be ready to go and join me on the final webinar. We could talk a little bit about that social enterprise planning process. Okay. I'm getting some help here to go back to the final slides, because I'm a little technically challenged. Thank you. Okay, so we've got a little bit of our homework. You've seen a bit of that resource. I really encourage you to look at it. We have 2 upcoming webinars, September 19th and October 4th. The next one is on feasibility, and the following is on planning. I also want to raise your attention to the community practice Q&A, and that will be from 10:30 to 11:30 on the 13th. Bring your questions and comments, and many of you will have comments to share. And I don't know if we had any questions through the webinar, but I don't think we did. So please do bring questions and comments to the Q&A. And for those of you who are very motivated, there are there's a free 4-part series of webinars, Introduction to Social Enterprise, that's just hot off the press. They're coming out right now, that the Social Enterprise Council of Canada, Imagine Canada, and ENP, Enterprising Nonprofits, is hosting. You can get to that by looking on the web at Enterprising Nonprofit, or maybe more likely the Social Enterprise Council of Canada, or contact me at the end of the webinar. I can give you that information. I've enjoyed presenting to you. I wish I could see you in person, but that's not possible. I hope you'll join me again. Please remember to provide your feedback on this session. A link will be sent to you immediately following the webinar. And I think I'll take this opportunity then to sign out. Bye for now.